Welcome to this webinar on just 14% of managers and directors will get promoted this year, how to be one of them. Well, my experience of working with managers and directors is that they are in general hardworking, smart, and dedicated. And yet just 14% of them will get promoted in any one year, according to statistics from the ONS. And that those figures have remained relatively static for the last 3 or 4 years for which we have data, which raises the big question, what can you do to be one of those 14%? And I think part of the challenge comes from the fact that much of the conventional wisdom around how to become part of that 14% is frequently misleading, incomplete, and sometimes just downright wrong. So my aspiration is that by the end of this webinar, you will have had a fundamental shift in the way that you think about getting promotion, that you will understand how companies really make decisions about who is going to succeed and who isn't, that you'll be able to access that hidden information and that you will be able to exploit it positively to get the promotion that you want. And you'll also be able to decide when to use that information and when you shouldn't. So this actual webinar is a post-production, if you like, recording of a webinar that took place in May 2023. And this part comprises of about 40 minutes of me talking. In the live webinar, there were we had a question and answer session at the end, and we had various parts of audience participation. They are not included in this version of the webinar. This is just me really talking through the content of the slides. Okay, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm afraid, because I'm not doing this live, so there will be times when you'll see me looking down at my notes. Okay, so let's start with a brief introduction of who I am for those of you that don't know me. So I started my academic career studying a degree that involved, amongst other things, psychology, sociology, neurology, psycholinguistics, a whole mixture of things. And I am also a qualified lecturer in further education and an executive coach. So I started my first real job, if you like, lecturing in industrial psychology at Leeds. I did that for a number of years, and then I went into HR and coaching, and I'm very proud to say that I did my executive coaching training with the organization that were the very first people to bring executive coaching to the UK. And for those of you who work in that space, they were the people that actually co-developed the GROW model with John Whitmore. Anyway, so outside of my executive coaching, I spent decades in HR, designing, amongst other things, succession planning systems, performance management, and management development systems and tools and techniques for large global corporates. So what you will hear in this webinar is a very unique insider view, not available on the open market, about what really happens when organizations sit down to decide who's going to get promoted and who isn't. So in that sense, if you like, I'm the gamekeeper turned poacher. And on the flip side of that, I've worked with over 500 managers and directors, helping them fast track their career to get the promotions that they want and they deserve. And despite what might look like a certain disparity across those various roles, all of them have been linked with my one overriding passion right from my early days when I was lecturing, and that was understanding what it is to be human and what is the psychology behind that and what is the psychology behind the decisions that we and organizations take around what does it mean to be successful at work. So without any more ado, let's start by looking at that question. What does it mean to be successful at work? Well, for me, if I think about long-term career success in particular, I am thinking about that time of success where you get one promotion after another, where you feel valued, where you feel properly rewarded for what you bring, and where you actually look forward to Mondays. And in my experience, the single biggest determinant of that type of long-term career success is fit. But what is fit? Fit is a sweet spot where 4 things come together: 2 that relate to the needs of the individual and 2 that relate to the needs of the organization. So let's start off by looking at the needs of the individual. That's you and me. And the first thing to understand is our relationship with, for most of us, our relationship with our employer is transactional. That means that we give things and we expect things back in return. So I'm going to label all the things that we give to an organization our abilities. And this covers a myriad of things. It's the experience, not just our work experience, but our life experience that we bring. It's the knowledge that we bring. It's our skill sets. And it's the time and effort and dedication that we will pour into our job for 40, 50, however many hours it is a week. And the most important thing about our abilities is that not only are they things that we believe have value, they are things that we expect others to value about us. And hang on to that thought, because I think a lot of the faulty thinking about what we need to do to get promoted stems from that belief. Okay, so we give things that we value and we expect others to value to an organization. And we want things back because it's a transactional relationship. And the things that we want back, I'm going to label as aspirations. And those aspirations can be in anything, you know. For some of us, it's we want the opportunity to manage a bigger team or work internationally. Some of us might want a 10% increase in salary. Some of us might want a seat on the board, or just to gain the trust and respect of our peers. Whatever. And surprise, surprise, because it is a transactional relationship, our employer feels exactly the same. They give things and they want things back. So how do we know what it is that our organizations really want from us? Well, you know, conventional wisdom will tell us that all that information is laid out very clearly in a wash of documents. And of course, you know, organizations have more or less of this, but some organizations, and I've certainly worked for them, will have the whole gamut. They will have competency descriptions, job descriptions, career ladders, person specs, performance appraisals, lists of mandatory training, corporate values, mission statements, project plans, objectives, project reviews, etc., etc. And while these documents will undoubtedly give us really useful information about required activities, the problem with them is that they fail to distinguish between activity and perceived value. And let me just give you some very simple examples of the difference between the two. So you often see this most brutally if your company is subject to a merger. And that's where you find yourself in the situation that where once highly prized skills that you had in your pre-merger company are now no longer not only highly prized, they're actually seen to be a liability. And to give you an example from my own experience, I worked for a boutique organization whose value as an organization came from their ability to tailor make all their products to their clients and their really high level individual client handling skills. And they were sold to an organization from New York who were very much the opposite. It was bums on seats. They were not interested in tailor making their product. It was just roll it out in a standard form. And they had absolutely no interest in one-to-one client handling skills. So all those wonderful skills that I had suddenly had absolutely no value. And not only did they have no value, they were seen to be detrimental to the organization's new mission. So that's one example. You can see that the reverse in a positive way. If you change company, you know, you can change company and suddenly find that your more cautious, risk-averse approach to project management that was derided in your last company is suddenly seen to be fabulous in your new company. Or you may see it in the scenario where you encounter people who just bang on and just won't stop about the way things were done in their old company and how much better it was. And you might have found yourself asking the question, why is that? Well, I would suggest that one of the reasons why that is because the things that they're banging on about were things that they were rewarded in their previous company and is not being rewarded in this one. So that raises a really important question for me, and that is what changed? Was it people's actual physical abilities, or was it the perception of the value of those abilities? And I suggest that it wasn't the abilities, it was the perception of the value of those. So I hope at this point that you relate to that. So my main point here is that what we need to be thinking about in terms of long-term career success is not the abilities that we bring, it's how valued those abilities are seen. And they're all about subjective perceptions. And that's the big shift change in the way we think about promotion, because now we are dealing in that very murky area of individual subjective perceptions of value. Okay, and it's very important. And why is that? Well, it's because of this. If we focus on some objective measures of abilities, they only get us into the promotion pool. And I'm not saying that they're not important. If you work in a regulated industry, for example, and you haven't done the mandatory training, you will not get into the promotions pool. So they are important, but they only get us into the promotions pool. And promotion is a competitive process. Where it doesn't get you to is here, which is where you want to be. This part out at the front, right at the front of the promotions queue. So when people are thinking about the promotion, the very first name that comes into mind is yours. Okay. So we've talked about one thing that employers look at in terms of their transactional relationship with us, perceptions of value. But what else do they look at? Well, the other thing that employers consider before they invest large amounts of money in you and time and effort when they are thinking about promoting you is they need you to conform to their idea of the type of people that are successful around here. And that thinking I'm going to label success factors. So what are success factors? Well, frankly, success factors can be anything. They can be skills or traits or motives or attitudes. They can be sets of knowledge. They can be values. They can be any other personal characteristic. But the important thing is they are all factors that are believed to be positively correlated with success. And those beliefs are not always related to objective reality. So let's just take a closer look at that. So what else do we know about success factors? Well, they're often hidden, frankly. Don't expect to necessarily find them written down in the company mission statement or its values. And why is that? Well, that's because sometimes true success factors are not very palatable. And they're not good PR. So nobody's going to be talking about them, but they will be kicking around when it comes to deciding who's going to get promoted and who's not. So let me give you some real life examples of those hidden, unpalatable, not good PR success factors that I have encountered in real life. So this first one was from a financial services client. And this was part of the introductory rah-rah welcome to the company speech that got regularly given to new entrants. And it was, you're going to get paid a lot of money here. We are going to really stretch you and your skills are going to grow fast and we will just max out your experience. But if you can't hack it, don't expect to care about it, us to care about it or to worry about it, because we don't and we won't. If you get burnt out, your problem. This next one is an example from a very well-known global company whose products I'm sure you will have used at some stage or other. And this was advice given by a very exasperated guy to one of his directors. And it was, who wasn't seen to be performing very well. And it was, for God's sake, just hit your numbers. I don't care how you hit your numbers. I don't care what corners you have to cut to get there. Just hit them. And if you have to do something creative along the way, just don't get caught. And then there was one from my own experience. on becoming a director was, if you want to do really well around here, you've definitely got to learn to play golf. So if you want to look at sources of data outside of my personal experience as to, whether or not there are groups of people that are seen to be successful, more successful than others, you only have to look at the statistics on BAME or the pay gap to show that in some organizations, well, in fact, all organizations actually, there are definitive views about the kinds of people that are successful around here, and that they are views that are not based really on objective assessments of contribution. Okay, and I'll leave you with one other thought on that, and that is Slaughter and May. So I'm absolutely sure that Slaughter May will not be proactively advertising that they have a 42% pay gap. And yet, if I was a woman working in that organization, I would want to know that one of the success factors, or one of the views around what it takes to be successful around there, is tied to something I can't do anything about, and that's my gender. Okay, so because success factors are often hidden and they don't get discussed in public, they're inevitably variable. And they can be variable in different ways. They can vary from one division to another. So, for example, when I worked for Glaxo, views around the kinds of people that are successful around here in the manufacturing company were very different from the views of what it was like to be successful in the research company. And that's, it can be legitimate because they're dealing with different types of activity. But they can vary within divisions, within departments, and they can even vary from one manager to another. And why is that important to you? Well, it's important to you because with variability comes inconsistency in expectation. And that inconsistency is something you'll have to manage if you want to get right to the front of that promotions queue. And the last thing to say about them, which I'm sure you'll get the drift by now, is that they are enormously powerful. These ideas of who can be successful, who doesn't, can drive social cohesion in a group. And if you've ever wondered why people with similar experience and qualifications than you seem to be getting more recognition, it is almost invariably because in some way they conform better to somebody's idea of the types of people that are successful around here. And I'll give you just one really blatant example of this, just as a little lighter relief. This is not about employees, but this is about how powerful those expectations are in commercial negotiations. So one of the organizations I worked for, I loved working for them. They were a really smart board and really nice people, and they generally took very considered decisions. And this organization was employing 30-odd thousand people, so we are not talking about a small organization here. And they had their PR contract up for renewal. And this was a contract that came up for renewal every 3 years or so. And the current incumbent was doing a really good job, and they were very happy with him. He really was a shoo-in for the next 3 years. But, in order to be fair, they went for competitive tender. And the incumbent normally turned up at these board meetings in a slightly battered briefcase. He had the suit and the whole attire, but it wasn't quite top notch. It made a little bit, worn. So this particular board meeting, this particular tender review, he was late. And he made the mistake of parking his car. He normally stuck it at the back of the car park. He made the mistake of sticking it right in the director's slot. And I don't, for the life of me, remember what car it was. I do remember it was considerably more expensive than anything that the directors were driving. And this got discussed at that board meeting after he left, when they were deciding who to give the contract was. And the view was very clearly that he was obviously making far too much money from that contract. And it was ridiculous because whoever they paid, it was the same amount of money. But it really stuck with them that he was making too much money out of them. And he just shifted from that box of the types of people that we do business with to the types of people we don't do business with. And he lost the contract. So just a small example of why these assumptions about what it takes to be the right kind of person have very real world consequences. Okay, so let's just recap. So our relationship with our employer is essentially transactional. We give things, we want things back. It's the same with our employer. They give things, they want things back. And when we focus only on conventional wisdom and standard measures around performance, like performance appraisals, objectives, sales figures even, that only gets us into the promotions pool. It doesn't get us to the front, because what we need to be seen in this competitive process is providing added value. And that is all about individual subjective perceptions of value and how well we're seen to fit with that idea of the types of people that do well on here. Okay, all well and good. So what do we actually do with this? Well, how do you use that knowledge to become one of the 14% that will get promoted in average on any particular year? Well, there are 4 things you need to do, not in any particular order, although there is a little bit of chronology, which will be obvious in a moment. You need to identify who the key promotion decision makers are, and that is not as simple as it seems. You need to uncover what they really think of your value, and we'll look at all the challenges with that a little later. And you need to uncover as well how well they see that you're fitting with their individual success factors. And obviously, in order to do that, as a precursor, you have to uncover what those hidden success factors are. So let's just start off by looking at that question of how you identify the key promotion decision makers. So in the actual webinar, we had a live poll on this. So this poll asked people to choose you can choose as many answers as you like. Which of the following people influence key decisions about your promotion? Are they your immediate manager, your HR? Is it your manager's manager? Is it your main clients? Maybe it's the head of quality or operations or functional leads if you're working in a matrix environment. Or maybe it's finance or other. And these were the results that came back. So the most obvious thing that most people thought who would influence their promotion and the key decisions that are taken around that were my immediate manager. And then HR was seen to have very low influence. Actually, from my experience, that's not true, but that was the perception of people in the room. My manager's manager, quite a lot of people selected that. Virtually nobody. In fact, actually, I can tell you, nobody thought about the head of quality or operations or functional lead. Finance was important to some. And sorry, my main clients came because we had salespeople in there. That was important for them, and nobody picked other. And I think the really important point that needs to be made there, if you're thinking that the main person that you need to impress or seen to be delivered value to is your manager, you are missing out on an enormous number of other people who will be influencing decisions about your promotions. And that is just really a small list of potential people. Okay. So we know that we have to identify our key decision key decision people rather. Okay, so the next step is to uncover what they really think of your value and to uncover how well they see your fit with success. But I'm going to leave that for a moment because I'll come back to it. I want to look now at how do you uncover what those hidden success factors are that are rattling around your organization. Well, the first thing is to pay attention. The data is actually all around you. You just need to look for it. So ask yourself questions like, who actually gets promoted? Is that managers who are considered a very safe pair of hands and are risk averse, or are they people who are driving innovation? Are they people who've worked a lot overseas, or are they people who've stayed very close to head office, wherever that might be located? What does your company do when it comes to board appointments? Does it like to grow its own, or does it take in people from outside? And what about people who make ethical decisions at the cost of short-term pain? Are they people who are revered as role models? Are they people who are seen as thought leaders? Are they people that get rewarded and recognition? Or is it people who just have a relentless drive for profit and are not interested in ethical issues? And of course, those issues are not always black and white, but I'm just trying to get you to think about it. So just look and see who it is that actually gets promoted and rewarded. The second thing you can do is to ask the right question. And the right question in this context is, of course, what kinds of people do well around here? And there are actually, that's the simplest question, but there are lots of forms of asking that question. You can say, for example, I quite like this one too. Tell me about what you see as the most important factors that determine success in the role of whatever. And you'll note that that question introduces the concept of prioritization. And that's important because not only do views of success vary from one individual to another, the relative priorities can differ because you can have three people who agree that the same three factors are important for success, but they'll rank them in different orders. And that's the stuff that you need to know. You need to know exactly who thinks what and the relative priority they're attaching to each of those. Okay, so that'll give you a feel for the right question. You've also, of course, got to ask the right people. So obviously that's people who either have influence, again, over your promotion decisions made about you, or there may be people who aren't that, but are in the position to know what kinds of success factors get considered. So it's not really about asking your best friend in finance, unless they're in one of those two categories. And ideally, you would want to ask people whose opinion you trust. But this question about what kinds of success factors are necessary what kinds of characteristics are necessary for success in X is a fabulous question for starting relationships with key influencers that you don't already have a relationship with, because I find that most people will be very happy to answer that question. Okay, so at this point, we will have identified our key decision makers. We will have been thinking about those. We will have uncovered some hidden success factors. So what happens next? Well, what happens next is that we now need to look at these two issues of what are these key influences, think about our value, and think about how well we fit with these success factors. And we do that because there are guides to how well our overall readiness for promotion is seen. So how do we get that knowledge? Well, we could, of course, consult paper, but paper has some very serious limitations. And when I'm talking about consulting paper, I mean looking at formal documents like performance appraisals, project reviews, etc., if you've got all of that, development plans. So let me just look at the limitations of paper as a data source. So the first one of this is fear of consequences. The instant somebody writes something down, it becomes a matter of public record. And that can play against you in two very significant ways. And I find, ironically enough, this is almost worse in organizations that have very refined objective setting performance management measures. So the first thing that happens, somebody will think that you're not really too good at that, or you didn't do a very good job in that situation, but they won't feel confident that they've got enough hard data to definitively prove that, so they won't write it down. Because let's face it, nobody looks forward to a conversation with HR, or worse still, a conversation at an industrial tribunal. So that's one thing why the people won't always be fully honest about what they think. And the second thing is they don't want to overpromise things. Managers may well feel that you have a good chance of promotion, but they won't say that. They may even think that you are their preferred option, but they won't always tell you that because they don't want to make promises that they can't deliver. So fear of consequences is a really important thing why paper can't always tell you what you need. Okay. The next thing is, I say tomato, you say tomato, let's call the whole thing off. This is that wonderful phenomena where two people use exactly the same words to describe completely different things. And I don't know why, but conflict management seems to be a particular swamp area for examples like this. So, for example, I've heard two people talk about conflict management, and one say to the other, you're really good at conflict management, and they've meant you're really good at getting people to agree, all come together to agree a solution. And the person they've said it to has walked out of the room being absolutely convinced that they're good at conflict management because they are very clear about what is negotiable and what isn't. And of course, the problem with that is that person that's walked out of the room is going to carry on delivering stuff that the other person really doesn't care about. It's not where they see the value. Okay, so unless your paper source has very explicit examples of what's meant, chances are you'll deliver something that's wildly irrelevant. Okay. The other problem with data sources is they frequently focus in the wrong direction. They're backward looking. They're about past performance, when of course what you want is an assessment of future performance. And in particular, what you really want to know is how ready are you seen to be promotion? What gaps do you need? And where do you actually rank in relation to your peers in this whole highly competitive process? And I have come across very few cultures that will actually be honest about where you rank. I mean, for a whole number of reasons that sometimes people don't always know, especially if you have a promotions process that does use managers coming together and ranking in the moment. So you could try asking a direct question, which says, where do I rank against my peers? See what happens. But actually, there are, in my view, others more effective ways of asking that question. And that is, you can ask things like, is there, who else do you think I could learn about strategic thinking from? Who do you think it might benefit me to talk to about sales presentations or whatever? Because whoever they come back with is going to be seen to be better at that skill than you. Otherwise, they wouldn't be referring you. Okay. But the biggest drawback of all is the inability to ask with intentionality. And asking with intentionality is a very sophisticated skill. And it's the art of using what look like data collection questions to actively shape people's perceptions of the values that you bring and to drive your own agenda. So let me give you just a very small example of that. Let's say that your manager's manager really rates your operational skills, but he doesn't see your strategic skills. And, that could be something as just as simple as the fact that he doesn't see it. He just doesn't have enough exposure about it. And you want to shift that dialogue to him understanding that you have strategic skills. Well, one way you can do that is to ask him a question. You can say to him, what did you think of my long-term planning proposals in document X? Now, it doesn't matter a damn if he's seen document X or not. Just by asking that question, you have sowed that seed that you are thinking strategically about something. In fact, it works even if you don't have a document X. If you don't have a document X, you can ask them with some question like, I'm thinking about why we do X when our competitors are doing Y. I mean, what's your views on the pros and cons of this? And again, you've just stuck that seed in their brain that they won't be able to get rid of, that you are thinking strategically. And there is no opportunity to do that when you're interacting with an inanimate document. Okay, so if paper has its limitations as a data source, how do you get this critical information? Well, the best way of getting it is through what I call discovery conversations. And these are just very brief face-to-face conversations, 10, 15 minutes at the max, with the people that you've identified as key influencers. And the purpose of them is to uncover the data that will allow you to focus your activity on just the handful, and I'm stressing here, the handful of actions that will raise assessments of your readiness for promotion. And that's one objective, if you like. Other objectives are so that you can strengthen existing relationships with people or create new ones. And I kind of alluded to how you can do that with people who influence your promotion, but you don't yet have a relationship, by asking them that question about views as success factors in relation to whatever role you're thinking about. And you can also use it to change negative perceptions into positive ones. So really, that leads on to the content. Okay, so what kind of content should you be putting in those conversations? Well, this is where asking with intentionality really comes to the fore. So what you want to be doing in these discussions, you want to be focusing on areas that you believe are required for promotion and that you have. Because asking questions about that is really just showcasing the strengths that you've got, like the strategic skills ones I've talked about earlier. It's drawing attention to the areas in which you're ready for promotion. And that's always got to be good. You want to talk about areas where there is a perceived, in your mind, where there's a shortfall in readiness for promotion. And, quite often you will find that that only exists in your head, and people have moved on from that. And having that knowledge will stop you again putting time and energy in correcting areas of shortfall that don't exist, and you can rechannel that energy into areas where there are issues that need to be resolved. And again, you can flesh out people's priorities, which is also driving this focus on the key actions by just saying, what are the top 2 things you think I should focus on in terms of getting promoted this year? And I've talked earlier about the competition, just asking a little question like, which of my peers do you think I could learn most from this year? That's another way of asking that question. And finally, the success factors. I want to get promoted this year. What kind of characteristics do you believe I've got to demonstrate to be able to do that? So that's just some quick guidelines on content. Okay, so now what? You've got the information you need. You've identified your key influencers. You've gone around, you've talked to them, you've found out what they value about you. You know what you've got to work on. You know what you don't have to work on. You've got it all. So how do you use it? And actually, should you use this information? Well, one of the problems that I see is that when people think about promotion and going for it, they do not have a rigorous thought process around return on investment. So the first question I would suggest that you ask yourself about, because this is really a return on investment question rather than an ethics question, is what is the true cost of acquisition? What is this promotion going to cost me in terms of time, effort, work, life balance, ethics sometimes? What have I got to give up? I've just had a baby, or my partner's just had a baby. And that's taking a lot of my time and focus. Do I really want to go all out for promotion this year? Maybe I'd be better off waiting for next year. I really, really like meeting people and being on the operational side of this. But this promotion is going to take me away from that, and I'm going to be more office-based. Is that something I really want? So think about the true cost of acquisition. The next big question that for me is, will the reward actually deliver what you think it's going to deliver? So, for example, one of the things that I really wanted when I became a director was I was driven by the desire of more autonomy. I could run the HR department the way that I wanted it to. I wouldn't have to manage endless stakeholders. And I found that reward, if you like, only partially delivered. Yes, I had much more autonomy about how I structured the HR department, the culture I put in the place, what it did. So from that point of view, it was hugely rewarding. But did I get rid of stakeholders? Oh, no. I just got a different set of stakeholders who in some ways were equally demanding. So just make sure that the reward that you want will actually get delivered. And the other question to ask yourself is, will that reward actually be enough? So, for example, if what really gets me up on a Monday morning is feeling that I'm going to be in a community of like-minded people, but I have to lose that, or I have to give up key values, is a 10% increase in salary or a bigger office or more reach? Is that really going to compensate for that? And that's a unique question. And the only person that is ever going to know that answer is you, because that's so individual. And once you've worked your way through all that, you may well find yourself asking, is there a better route? And that better route may well be going for promotion by leaving the current company and going to a new one. So let me just recap. Now we're coming to the end of all of this. If you want to get promotion, really what you want to be thinking about is perceptions of value, not abilities, because abilities in themselves have no value. You need to be focusing on individual influence, and I cannot stress that enough. This is not a collective game. It's not about what people in general think. It's individual influences. Asking with intentionality is a game player. It's a fabulous way of proactively shaping people's vision of your promotability. Focus only on the stuff that needs to be fixed, that's broken. Don't spend your time and energy fixing stuff that nobody really cares about. And check that the view from the top is actually realistic and it will actually deliver what you want. So hopefully at this point, I will have inspired you to go out and at least try some of this stuff. And that's great. But just some caveats as to what may or may not be possible at this stage if you try and do it on your own. So obviously, this is just, I mean, I've talked, you probably feel as well, I've talked for a long time. But even with this is just skimming the surface of what is possible with this approach and this technique. It's just not possible to cover it all. The other thing is that this approach is not a one-size-fits-all. Every single individual and every single organization will be in its own unique place. So just to give you an example of that, if you are working for a company that has formal succession plans and they may or may not share that with you, the approach that you need to take will be very different from somebody working in an organization that does not have formal succession plans. Arcing with intentionality, it is an advanced skill. To get really good at this, you need to be practicing with an expert in it who can help you get to the required standard. And thirdly, this is not an overnight fix. If you just go back to that discovery conversation, you cannot get the information you need in one discovery conversation. You want to be doing it as a regular practice because you need to consistently collect data to just track how perceptions of you are changing. And every time you have a successful discovery conversation, it sets you up for the next one and the next one and the next one. And of course, as it's not an overnight fix, it's really useful to have an external perspective to point out what you can't see. None of us can fix our own stuff, to show options you've missed and to discuss ideas with you in a safe place. So if you are thinking of using this technique to really boost you to the front of that promotions queue and get that promotion time after time after time, I strongly advise that you work with an expert in that area. Okay, thank you very much for listening to this webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it. Obviously, you know how to contact me. So if you want to ask any questions about this or revisit any of it, or you just want to have a chat in general, please just DM me, email me, get on the phone. All my contact details are on my LinkedIn page. Thank you for your time.